June 6, 1944. D-Day. American Sherman tanks rolled onto Normandy beaches. July 1944. First Tiger IIs appeared. American 75mm guns bounced off like rubber balls. August 1944. Tank losses hit 580 vehicles in a single month. December 1944. Battle of the Bulge. Sherman crews refused to advance against King Tigers. January 1945. 20 experimental Pershings shipped to Europe. Too few. Too late. April 21, 1945. Dessau, Germany. A single American tank crawled through rubble. Its gun barrel stretched so long that German soldiers stopped running and stared. Inside that tank, Corporal John Irwin pressed his eye against the gunner's sight. His hands were shaking. 22 years old. Pennsylvania farm boy. Never fired this weapon in combat. 600 yards ahead, an enemy tank emerged from behind a collapsed building. Irwin had exactly 3 seconds to live or die. "Identified!" he screamed into the intercom. "Fire!" What happened next would become legend. But the truth is more insane than any legend. This is the story of how one furious maintenance officer, a crew of desperate engineers, and 5 young tankers built a monster weapon from scraps and changed everything. 18 months too late. Private Tommy Hendricks died on July 18, 1944. He was 19. His Sherman took an 88mm round through the hull at 1/800 meters. The German Tiger that killed him was so far away that Hendricks never saw it. His 75mm gun could not have scratched that Tiger even if he had closed to point-blank range. Captain Belton Cooper pulled Hendricks' body from the smoldering wreck 3 hours later. "How many is that?" his sergeant asked. Cooper did not answer. He was counting dog tags. Hendricks made 17 boys from his unit alone, all killed by tanks they could not hurt. The mathematics were simple and brutal. German Tigers engaged at 2,000 meters. Their 88mm guns punched through Sherman armor like paper. American 75mm guns could not penetrate Tiger frontal armor at any range. Not at 1,000 meters. Not at 500. Not at 100. This meant death. Every engagement required American crews to drive through 1,500 meters of open killing ground, while German gunners fired again and again. The odds of surviving that drive were roughly 1 in 4. Ronsons, the crews called their Shermans, light on the first strike. Cooper threw Hendricks's dog tags into a metal box with the others. The box was getting heavy. "Sir," a young lieutenant approached, fresh from the States, eager, naive. "Command says the 76mm gun will solve our problems. New Shermans arriving next week with upgraded weapons." Cooper laughed. It was not a happy sound. "Lieutenant, I have seen the penetration tables for the 76mm gun. It cannot go through a Panther's front armor at combat range. It cannot touch a Tiger. Those boys will die just like these boys died." But Sir General McNair himself approved the 76mm as adequate for... McNair has never sat inside a burning Sherman. Cooper walked away. His hands were shaking with rage. 17 dead. And the generals in Washington were sending upgraded guns that still could not kill German armor. Somewhere in Germany, Tiger crews were laughing at American tanks. Cooper swore he could hear them. Cooper was not supposed to care about gun penetration. He was a maintenance officer. His job was fixing broken tanks, not designing new ones. But Cooper was an engineer. He solved problems, and this problem was killing his men. Night after night, he sat in his tent studying German tank specifications. He measured armor plates salvaged from destroyed Panthers. He calculated angles, velocities, energy transfer. The numbers told a story that made him sick. American industry built the best aircraft in the world, the best trucks, the best artillery. In every category except tanks, American equipment matched or exceeded German designs. So why were American tankers dying in inferior machines? Cooper wrote reports, sent recommendations, begged for heavier guns and thicker armor. Every request was denied. Tank destroyer doctrine, his colonel explained. Tanks support infantry. Tank destroyers handle enemy armor. General McNair's orders. Sir, enemy tanks do not wait for our tank destroyers. They appear without warning. They ambush our columns. When Panthers show up, our Shermans have to fight. And when Shermans fight Panthers, Shermans die. Captain Cooper, are you questioning General McNair's judgment? Cooper wanted to scream. Yes. McNair was wrong. McNair's doctrine was killing American boys by the hundreds. McNair had never pulled a burned corpse from a Sherman hatch. McNair had never counted dog tags. No, sir, Cooper said. He walked out of the briefing. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. That night, Cooper made a decision. If the Army would not build a tank that could kill tigers, he would build one himself. January 1945. Cooper's maintenance compound, Belgium. A transport truck arrived carrying something Cooper had never seen. The gun barrel extended 21 feet, so long that external springs had to be mounted on the turret just to balance the weight. Cooper walked around the vehicle 3 times, his mouth hanging open. T-26E4, the delivery officer said. Experimental. Mounting the T-15E1 gun, 90 mm, 73 calibers long. Muzzle velocity, 140 meters per second. Cooper's heart stopped. Say that number again. 140 meters per second, sir. Cooper grabbed a pencil and started calculating on his palm. Standard 90 mm guns fired at 810 meters per second. This monster fired 40% faster. That extra velocity meant penetration, massive penetration. What can it go through? Cooper asked. 260 millimeters at 1,000 meters. Cooper sat down on an ammunition crate. His legs would not hold him. 260 millimeters. A Tiger II's frontal armor was 150 millimeters. For the first time in the entire war, America had a gun that could kill a king tiger from the front. Sir, you okay? Cooper was laughing. Tears ran down his face. He was laughing and crying at the same time. How many of these do we have? Just this one, sir. Only prototype to reach Europe. The laughter stopped. 1-1. We have been dying for 3 years, and you send us one. Orders from Washington, sir. They want combat evaluation before mass production. Cooper stood up. His expression had changed. No more tears, no more laughter, just cold determination. Fine. 1 tank, 1 chance. We are going to make it count. Cooper walked around the T-26E4 with his maintenance sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Murphy, who had been fixing tanks since North Africa. Beautiful gun, Murphy said. Shame about the armor. Cooper nodded grimly. The T-26E4 had the same protection as a standard Pershing. 102 mm on the hull. 114 mm on the turret. Against the Tiger II's 80 mm gun, this armor would fail. We can kill them, Cooper said. But they can kill us just as easily. That is not good enough. What are you thinking, Captain? Cooper pointed to a pile of salvaged armor plates. Scrap from destroyed Panthers. German steel. The same steel that had stopped countless American shells. I am thinking we make our own armor package, right here, tonight. Murphy stared at him. Sir, that is completely unauthorized. We have no engineering drawings, no approval from ordnance. If this goes wrong, I will take the court-martial. But I am not sending another crew into combat in a tank that cannot protect them. Murphy was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. I will get the welding torches. They worked through the night. No sleep, no breaks, just sparks flying and metal screaming. First 2 38mm boiler plates welded to the hull front. Then an 80mm Panther glacis plate cut to fit the gun mantlet. Holes drilled for the gunner's sight, the barrel the coaxial machine gun. more plates added to the turret sides as counterweights. By dawn, the T-26E4 had gained 5 tons. It looked like a monster. Ugly, mismatched, covered in rough welds and salvaged German steel. "It looks like Frankenstein," Murphy said. Cooper put his hand on the armor, still warm from welding. "Frankenstein killed the people who underestimated him. Let the Germans underestimate this." Staff Sergeant Joseph Madria was 24 years old, tank commander, 2 years of combat. He had seen friends burn alive in Shermans. He had learned to hate the sound of German 88s. When they showed him the Super Pershing, Madria did not speak for a full minute. "That gun," he finally said. "That gun is beautiful. It can penetrate 260 millimeters at 1,000 meters, Cooper told him. "You can kill a king tiger from the front." Madria's jaw tightened. He had lost his best friend to a king tiger at the Bulge, shot through the turret at 1,500 meters. Never had a chance to shoot back. "When do we leave?" "April. You will be attached to the 33rd Armored Regiment, Spearhead Unit." Madria turned to his gunner. "Corporal John Irwin, farm kid from Pennsylvania. Best shot in the battalion." "Irwin, you ready to kill some tigers?" Irwin's hands were steady. His eyes were cold. "I have been ready since Normandy, Sergeant." April 4th, 1945. Weser River, Germany. The 3rd Armored Division pushed east through crumbling German resistance. The Super Pershing rolled at the front of the column. Enemy fire erupted from a wooded hill, machine guns, anti-tank weapons. American infantry dove for cover. "Tank!" someone screamed. "German tank on the forward slope." Irwin swung his sight toward the hill. His heart hammered. There, partially concealed, gun barrel visible, range. "Range? 1,500 yards, Irwin reported. His voice cracked. Nobody made shots at 1,500 yards. Not with a tank gun. The standard Sherman's effective range was maybe 800 yards against armored targets. At 1,500, you were just wasting ammunition. "Take the shot," Madria ordered. "Sergeant, that is." "I said take the shot." Irwin exhaled. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Squeeze, do not pull. Let the shot surprise you." His finger tightened on the trigger. The T-15E1 roared. The recoil slammed Irwin backward. His ears rang. Through the sight, he watched the tracer streak across the battlefield. 1 second. 2 seconds. Impact. The German vehicle exploded. The turret lifted off the hull and cartwheeled through the air. Debris rained across 50 meters. Secondary explosions tore the wreck apart. "Holy shit!" the loader screamed. "Did you see that?" Irwin sat frozen. His hands trembled. 2 years of combat. He had never seen destruction like this. One shot, 1,500 yards, total annihilation. "Irwin," Madria's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "What the hell did they give us?" The radio crackled. Other tank commanders had witnessed the shot. Their voices overlapped with excitement and disbelief. "Was that the Super Pershing? Did you see that range? 1 shot. He killed it with 1 shot." Irwin looked down at his shaking hands. For 3 years, American tankers had been the prey, outgunned, outranged, watching friends die in burning Shermans. Not anymore. "Load AP," Irwin said. His voice was steady now. "Let them come. Let them all come." The Super Pershing had proven itself. 1,500 yards, 1 shot, 1 kill. But this was just the beginning. In 17 days, Madria and Irwin would roll into Dessau, a city choked with rubble, perfect ambush terrain. Somewhere in that urban nightmare, German armor was waiting. The crew did not know what they would face. Tiger Eye Panther. Or the legendary King Tiger. The most heavily armored tank in the world. They did not know that the engagement would last exactly 20 seconds. They did not know that German prisoners would ask that haunting question, "What kind of monster weapon did you bring?" And they did not know that historians would argue for 80 years about what really happened on April 21st, 1945. One thing was certain. The mathematics of armored warfare had changed. For the first time, American tankers were not the prey. They were the hunters. In Part 2, we followed the Super Pershing into the rubble-choked streets of Dessau. We witnessed the 20-second engagement that became legend. We examine the controversial evidence, and we discover the tragic truth about why this weapon arrived 18 months too late to save thousands of American lives. The answers will make you furious. Stay tuned. Captain Belton Cooper, a maintenance officer who watched 17 boys die in inferior tanks, a gun that could finally kill Tiger IIs. A Frankenstein monster built from salvaged German armor in a single night, and a shot at 1,500 yards that proved everything. The Super Pershing worked. But here is what nobody told you. That single tank was the only Super Pershing in all of Europe. One tank, one gun, one crew, against an enemy fielding hundreds of Panthers and dozens of King Tigers. Why? Because 3 years earlier, a general in Washington decided that American tanks should never fight other tanks. His name was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, and his doctrine had already killed over 4,000 American tankers by the time Cooper welded those armor plates. The Super Pershing proved American industry could build weapons to match the Germans. So why did it take until April 1945? The answer involves bureaucratic warfare more vicious than anything on the battlefield. Generals protecting their careers, colonels defending failed doctrines, and one maintenance captain who refused to shut up. This is where everything got worse. October 1943. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C., 18 months before Cooper built his monster. A young ordnance officer named Major George Grubb stood before a conference table. Around him sat the men who controlled American tank production. Generals, colonels, logistics experts, men who had never heard a German 88 tear through Sherman armor. Grubb was terrified, but he had data, and the data was damning. "Gentlemen," he began, "our M4 Sherman cannot penetrate the frontal armor of the German Panther tank at any combat range. Our 75mm gun is obsolete." Silence. "I am recommending immediate production of a heavy tank mounting a 90mm gun with substantially increased armor protection. The T-26 prototype is ready for Major." A voice cut him off. Cold. Authoritative. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair leaned forward. "Are you aware of Army Ground Forces doctrine regarding tank employment?" "Yes, sir, but..." "Tanks support infantry. Tank destroyers engage enemy armor. This doctrine has been tested and proven. Your proposal for heavy tanks contradicts established policy." Grubb felt sweat running down his back. "Sir, the tank destroyers cannot be everywhere. When German armor appears unexpectedly, our Shermans must engage, and when they engage Panthers or Tigers, they die." McNair's expression did not change. "The 76mm gun will address any deficiencies. It is already in production." "Sir, the 76mm cannot penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. I have the penetration tables right here." "Major." McNair stood up. The room went silent. "I have 30 years of military experience. I commanded artillery in the Great War. I have studied armored warfare since its inception. Are you suggesting that your penetration tables outweigh my professional judgment?" Grubb opened his mouth, closed it. He knew what happened to officers who contradicted McNair publicly. "No, sir." "Then this meeting is concluded. The T-26 program will receive minimal funding. The Sherman with 76mm gun will remain our primary medium tank. Dismissed." Grubb walked out of that room knowing that men would die because of what just happened. He was right. By the time McNair was killed by friendly fire in Normandy, 8 months later, over 2,000 American tankers had burned to death in Shermans that could not fight back. But McNair's doctrine outlived him. The generals he had trained continued blocking heavy tank production. The colonels he had promoted kept rejecting proposals for better armor and guns. It took 3 more years for the Pershing to reach Europe in meaningful numbers. 3 years. 4,000 dead tankers. Because one general believed his doctrine more than he believed his own men. But buried in that same Pentagon, a colonel had been quietly fighting his own war, and he was about to find an unlikely ally in a maintenance compound in Belgium. January 1945. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Colonel Joseph Grubb. The same officer McNair had humiliated now ran the tank evaluation program. 2 years of watching his recommendations get rejected had not broken him. It had made him strategic. Grubb had learned to work around the system. He could not get heavy tanks approved through normal channels. But he could get experimental prototypes shipped to combat units for field evaluation. The T-26E4 Super Pershing was one of those prototypes. When Grubb heard what Cooper had done in Belgium, he picked up the phone immediately. "Captain Cooper, this is Colonel Grubb, Aberdeen Proving Ground." Cooper nearly dropped the receiver. Colonels did not call maintenance captains. "Sir, I heard about your armor modifications to the T-26E4. Unauthorized, against regulations, using salvaged enemy materials." Grubb paused. "Absolutely brilliant." Cooper did not know how to respond. "Captain, I have been fighting this battle since 1943. The brass does not want heavy tanks. They do not want to admit the Sherman is inadequate. They do not want to tell Congress that we have been sending boys to die in inferior equipment. Sir, I have watched. I know what you have watched. I have read every after-action report. I know the casualty figures better than the generals who caused them." Grubb's voice hardened. "Here is what we are going to do. Your Super Pershing is going to prove them wrong, not with reports, not with penetration tables, with kills. Sir, get that tank into combat, document everything, every engagement, every kill, every German tank destroyed. I need data that even the most stubborn general cannot ignore." Cooper understood. This was not just about winning battles. This was about winning the war inside the army. Proving that American industry could have saved thousands of lives if the right people had listened. "One more thing," Grubb added. "How is your crew?" Cooper looked through his office window. Madria and Irwin were running drills on the Super Pershing. They had been training 16 hours a day since the tank arrived. "They are ready, sir." "Good, because April is coming, and the 3rd Armored is heading straight for the German heartland." In 17 days, Staff Sergeant Madria and Corporal Irwin would face their ultimate test. Not just against German tanks. Against 80 years of mythology controversy and the most debated 20 seconds in armored warfare history. April 21, 1945. 06:30 hours. Dessau, Germany. Morning fog hung over the ruined city. 3 years of Allied bombing had reduced Dessau's industrial district to rubble. The Junkers aircraft factory, which had built Ju-88 bombers, was a skeleton of twisted steel and shattered concrete. Perfect ambush terrain. Madria stood in the commander's cupola scanning the streets ahead. His neck ached from tension. Every destroyed building could hide a German gun. Every pile of rubble could conceal a Panzerfaust team. "All stations, this is Red Leader. Super Pershing taking point. Standard dispersal. Watch the rooftops." The column moved forward. 3 Shermans behind the Super Pershing. Infantry on foot. Engineers checking for mines. Irwin sat in the gunner's seat. His hands rested on the controls. Steady. Ready. He had replayed the 500-yard shot 100 times in his mind. That kill had proven what this gun could do at extreme range. But Dessau was different. Urban combat. Close quarters. Ranges measured in hundreds of yards, not thousands. 06:47 hours. Intersection ahead. Gunner traverse left. Check that side street. Irwin swung the massive gun barrel. The T-15E1 responded smoothly despite its length. Through his sight, he saw rubble. Burned vehicles, a dead horse, no movement. Clear left. Driver advance, slow. The Super Pershing crawled forward. 30 tons of armor and salvaged German steel grinding over broken concrete. 0651 hours. Everything happened at once. Flash. A German gun fired from 600 yards. Irwin saw the muzzle blast before his brain processed what it meant. The round screamed past the Super Pershing. Close. So close that Irwin felt the shockwave through the armor. Contact front. Madria was already shouting into the intercom. Identified enemy tank 600 yards. Fire! Irwin had the target in his sight. German tank. Partially concealed behind rubble. Gun barrel already traversing for a second shot. He squeezed the trigger. The T-15E1 roared. The first round was high explosive. It struck the German tank's turret and exploded against the armor. Smoke and debris obscured the target. Hit! The loader screamed. But he is still moving. Through the smoke, Irwin saw the German tank lurch forward. It was climbing over the rubble pile, trying to close the range, trying to get a better shot. And then Irwin saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The German tank's belly armor became exposed. Every tank's weakest point was the underside. 15 to 20 millimeters of steel. Nothing compared to the frontal armor. Most tankers never got a shot at it because tanks did not normally expose their bellies to enemy fire. But this German tank was climbing rubble. Its front end rose into the air, its underside tilted toward the Super Pershing. AP load, AP! The loader slammed an armor-piercing round into the breech. 3 seconds. The fastest combat reload of his life. Up he! Irwin adjusted his aim. Belly armor, center mass. 20 millimeters of steel between his tungsten penetrator and the ammunition stored inside that hull. He fired. The round struck perfectly. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the German tank exploded. The ammunition detonated with catastrophic force. The turret, weighing several tons, lifted completely off the hull and cartwheeled through the air. It landed 50 feet away with a crash that shook the ground. Secondary explosions tore through the wreck. Flames shot 30 feet high. Silence. Irwin stared through his sight at the burning hulk. His hands were shaking. The entire engagement had lasted 20 seconds. Irwin. Madria's voice was barely a whisper. What did you just do? The radio exploded with chatter. Other crews had witnessed the kill. Their voices overlapped with shock and excitement. Did you see that? The turret flew 50 feet. One shot. He killed it with one shot. Later that day, German prisoners were brought through American lines. One of them, a sergeant who had served in armored units since 1941, saw the Super Pershing parked near the collection point. He stopped walking, stared at the 21-foot gun barrel, stared at the improvised armor plates. Then he turned to his American guard and asked a question that would echo through history. What kind of weapon is that? We have never seen anything like it. The American guard did not know how to answer. Neither did anyone else. The Super Pershing had proven itself in combat. One engagement. 20 seconds. Complete destruction. But proving a weapon works is not the same as changing an army's doctrine. The news spread through the 3rd Armored Division within hours. The Super Pershing had killed a German tank with a single shot. The turret had flown 50 feet. But what kind of German tank? Irwin believed it was a Tiger. The size, the shape, the way it had fired first from 600 yards with confidence that suggested heavy armor protection. Other witnesses were not sure. The smoke, the rubble, the chaos of urban combat. Positive identification was impossible. German records offered no clarity. By April 1945, Wehrmacht documentation had collapsed. Units were scattered. After-action reports were not being filed. The nearest confirmed Tiger II unit, SS Heavy Panzer Battalion 502, was fighting 70 miles away near Berlin. But the controversy over identification missed the larger point. The Super Pershing worked. It could engage and destroy German armor at ranges where Sherman crews would have died. The T-15E-1 gun delivered firepower that exceeded anything else in the American arsenal, and there was only one of them. On April 22nd, the Super Pershing destroyed a disabled Panther. The German tank's hull was immobilized, but its turret still functioned. As the Super Pershing approached, the Panther crew fired. Irwin fired back. The Panther exploded. Later that same day, 2 Panzer IVs drove across the Super Pershing's field of fire. Irwin destroyed the first with a single shot. The second tank stopped immediately. Its crew climbed out and surrendered without firing. They had seen what happened to the first tank. They wanted no part of that gun. In 3 days of combat around Dessau, the Super Pershing destroyed at least 4 German armored vehicles. Its crew took no casualties. The improvised armor that Cooper had welded in Belgium held against every threat they encountered. Colonel Grubb received the after-action reports at Aberdeen. He read them 3 times. Then he picked up the phone. "Get me Army Ground Forces headquarters. I have combat data they need to see." The data was undeniable. 1 prototype tank, 4 confirmed kills, 0 friendly casualties, engagement ranges exceeding standard Sherman capabilities by 400%. But the war was ending. Germany surrendered on May 8th, just 17 days after Dessau. The Super Pershing never fired its gun in anger again. And the questions began. Why had it taken until April 1945? Why had only 1 Super Pershing reached Europe? Why had American tankers spent 3 years dying in Shermans when this technology was available? The answers pointed directly at McNair's doctrine, at generals who protected their careers instead of their men, at a system that valued bureaucratic consensus over battlefield reality. 4,000 dead tankers, because the right weapon arrived 18 months too late. The Super Pershing had proven everything Cooper and Grubb believed. American industry could build tanks to match the Germans. The technology existed. The engineering worked. The failure was human. Generals who refused to listen. Colonels who protected failed doctrines. A system that punished innovation and rewarded conformity. But here is what makes this story even more tragic. The debate over what happened at Dessau would rage for 80 years. Was it a Tiger II? A Tiger I, a Panzer IV? Historians would argue. Veterans would disagree. The mythology would grow until it obscured the truth. And in that mythology, the real lesson would be lost. It was never about one tank killing another tank. It was about an army that sent its sons to die in inferior equipment because admitting a mistake was harder than watching boys burn. The Super Pershing proved the mistake. 20 seconds in Dessau, 1 shot, 1 kill. But the men responsible for those 4,000 deaths never faced consequences. They retired with honors. They wrote memoirs defending their decisions. They blamed production delays and logistics problems and everything except their own stubborn refusal to listen. In Part 3, we examine the real numbers. The penetration data that proves whether the Super Pershing could actually defeat a Tiger II frontally. The classified reports that revealed what German tankers really thought about American armor. And the devastating truth about how many lives could have been saved if the Pershing had arrived 18 months earlier. The mathematics of those dead boys will make you furious, because someone has to answer for them. Part 1. Captain Cooper built a monster from salvaged German steel. Part 2. That monster proved itself at Dessau. 20 seconds, 1 shot, a turret flying 50 feet through the air. The Super Pershing worked. The T-15E-1 gun could kill anything the Germans fielded. But here is the number that should keep you awake at night. 1. 1 Super Pershing reached Europe before the war ended. one prototype, one experimental vehicle, against an enemy that had fielded 347 Tiger Y tanks, 489 Tiger II tanks, over 6,000 Panthers. American industry produced 49 234 Sherman tanks during the war. They could have produced thousands of Pershings. They could have equipped entire armored divisions with guns that actually worked. They did not. The mathematics of that decision can be calculated precisely. Every unnecessary death, every burned tanker, every boy who died because his gun could not penetrate enemy armor. This is no longer about one tank and one crew. This is about 295 American tankers who did not have to die. German intelligence knew about the Pershing before it reached Europe. In December 1944, Wehrmacht analysts compiled a report on American tank development. They had photographs from American newspapers. Technical specifications leaked through neutral countries. Assessment reports from agents in South America who monitored American shipping. The report landed on the desk of General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops. Guderian read it twice. Then he called his staff together. "The Americans are finally building a real tank," he said. 90mm gun, heavier armor. This is what we expected 3 years ago. His operations officer looked concerned. "How many are they producing?" "Unknown. But American factories built 50,000 Shermans. If they commit to this new design." Guderian did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Every officer in that room understood what American industrial capacity meant. Germany produced 489 Tiger IIs during the entire war. America could produce that many tanks in a single week. "What are our options?" the operations officer asked. "Options?" Guderian laughed bitterly. "We have no options. We have fuel for perhaps 60 days of operations. Our tank factories are being bombed daily. We cannot produce enough Panthers to replace our losses, much less develop new weapons." The German response to the Pershing was simple. There was no response. By early 1945, German armored forces were fighting with whatever they had left. No new designs, no counterweapons, no strategic answer. They could only hope the Americans would not deploy enough Pershings to matter. That hope proved justified, not because American industry failed, but because American generals failed. The first Pershings reached combat units in February 1945. By VE Day in May, only 310 had arrived in Europe. Of those, fewer than 20 saw actual combat. 20 tanks, against an enemy that was terrified of what thousands might do. German prisoners captured in April 1945 were interrogated about their knowledge of American armor. Their responses revealed something remarkable. "The new American tank," one Panther commander said. "We were told it could penetrate our armor from 2 kilometers. Is this true?" The American interrogator did not know how to answer. The standard Pershing could not penetrate Panther frontal armor from 2 kilometers. The Germans had been given exaggerated intelligence, but that exaggeration revealed German fear. For the first time since 1942, German tankers were worried about American firepower. "We received orders to avoid engagement with the new American tanks if possible." Another prisoner stated, "We were told to call for artillery support instead of fighting directly." German armor tactics in April 1945 reflected this fear. Units that had previously sought tank versus tank combat now avoided it. They used their remaining vehicles for infantry support and defensive positions rather than offensive operations. The psychological impact exceeded the actual military impact. But while German tankers feared a weapon that barely existed, a different battle was raging inside the American Army itself. March 1945, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon. Colonel Grubb sat in an oak-paneled office facing 3 generals who controlled Army Ground Forces procurement. His hands held a folder containing after-action reports from Europe. The folder was thick with death. Colonel General John Hull began. "You requested this meeting to discuss tank casualties. We have reviewed your preliminary report. We find its conclusions premature." Grubb felt his jaw tighten. "Premature, sir." You suggest that earlier deployment of the T-26 Pershing could have reduced tank crew casualties by significant margins. This is speculation. Sir, I have penetration data showing the 75mm gun cannot defeat Panther frontal armor at any range. I have casualty reports showing Sherman losses in engagements where Pershings would have survived. You have hindsight, Colonel. General Hull's voice was cold. In 1943, we made decisions based on available information. Tank destroyer doctrine was sound. The 76mm upgrade was implemented. Production priorities were balanced against multiple competing needs. Grubb opened his folder. Sir, in the 6 months between D-Day and the Bulge, we lost 348 medium tanks in the European theater. Post-action analysis indicates that approximately 40% of those losses occurred in engagements where heavier armor or guns might have changed the outcome. Might have. 648 tanks, sir. At 5 crew members per tank, that represents over 3,000 casualties. Dead, wounded, burned. The room went silent. General Hull's face reddened. Colonel, are you suggesting that Army Ground Forces Command is responsible for those casualties? Grubb knew his career was ending. He said it anyway. I am suggesting, sir, that decisions made in 1943 had consequences in 1944 and 1945. The T-26 could have been in production 18 months earlier. It was not. Men died because of that delay. This meeting is concluded. Grubb stood up. He left the folder on the table. Every page documented another dead tank crew. Another family that would receive a telegram. Another boy who burned to death in a Sherman that could not fight back. The generals never read it. The folder was filed and forgotten. But the numbers did not disappear. They sat in Army archives waiting for historians who would ask the same questions Grubb had asked. Why did it take so long? Who was responsible? How many died unnecessarily? The answers would not come for decades. But while colonels fought generals in Washington, the war continued. And in the final weeks of fighting, the Pershing would prove exactly what American tankers had been missing. April 1st, 1945. The Ruhr Valley, Germany. The largest encirclement of the European war was closing. Allied forces had trapped 430,000 German soldiers in a pocket roughly 55 miles wide and 70 miles long. This was more prisoners than Stalingrad, more than any encirclement in military history. Inside that pocket, German Army Group B fought with desperate fury. They had 70 tanks remaining, mostly Panthers, a few Tiger Is. Their orders were simple: hold, fight, die. American forces pressing into the pocket included elements of the 3rd Armored Division, among them the Super Pershing. April 4th, Winterberg Sector. Madria's tank advanced along a forest road. Intelligence reported German armor in the area, retreating units trying to break out of the encirclement. 08:47 hours. Contact. Movement 1,000 yards. Multiple vehicles. Irwin swung the T-15E1 toward the contact. Through his sight, he counted them. 1, 2, 3. 4 German tanks emerging from a tree line. Panthers. All 4 of them. In a Sherman, this would be suicide. 4 Panthers against 1 medium tank. The mathematics guaranteed death. But Irwin was not in a Sherman. Identified 4 Panthers engaging. The first Panther's turret was still traversing when Irwin fired. The T-15E1 roared. The round crossed 1,000 yards in less than a second. Impact. The lead Panther's turret exploded. Ammunition detonation. The vehicle stopped, dead flames pouring from every hatch. 7 seconds to reload. The second Panther fired. The round struck the Super Pershing's improvised armor. Clang! The tank shuddered. But Cooper's welds held. Irwin fired again. The second Panther took the round through its gun mantlet. The penetrator went through the armor, through the breech of the German gun, through the loader standing behind it. The tank slewed sideways and stopped. 14 seconds. 2 kills. The third and fourth Panthers broke and ran. They reversed into the tree line, abandoning their position. German tanks retreating from a single American vehicle. Madria watched them go. His hands were shaking. "Did that just happen?" the loader whispered. It had happened. 1 Super Pershing against 4 Panthers. 2 destroyed. 2 fled. 0 American casualties. In a Sherman, that engagement would have killed them all. The 76mm gun could not penetrate Panther frontal armor reliably at 1,000 yards. They would have needed to close to suicidal range while taking fire from 4 enemy guns. The Super Pershing changed those mathematics completely. April 6th. Paderborn. The 3rd Armored Division reached the city limits. German resistance was collapsing, but not gone. Pockets of defenders held key intersections. One intersection was blocked by a Tiger I. The standard tactic against Tigers was to call artillery, or request air support, or try to flank with multiple tanks accepting losses. Nobody engaged Tigers frontally. Nobody except crews with guns that could actually hurt them. Madria's Super Pershing arrived at the intersection at 14:23 hours. "Tiger, 800 yards, he is covering the main road." Irwin acquired the target. The Tiger's massive silhouette was unmistakable. 100mm of frontal armor. The 88mm gun that had killed thousands of Allied tankers since 1942. Irwin did not hesitate. He fired. The round struck the Tiger's turret face. Penetration. The 88mm gun slammed upward as internal mechanisms shattered. Secondary explosion. Fire erupted from the commander's hatch. The Tiger had not even fired back. 15 minutes later, American infantry advanced through the intersection. They passed the burning Tiger without stopping. Just another dead German tank. But the tankers knew what it meant. The Tiger, the monster that had terrorized Allied armor for 3 years, killed with a single shot from a single tank. The mathematics had finally changed. April 12th. The Ruhr pocket collapsed. 430,000 German soldiers surrendered. The largest mass surrender of German forces during the entire war. Among the captured equipment were 48 tanks, including several Panthers that had fled from engagements with American armor. The Super Pershing had fired its gun in combat approximately a dozen times during the Ruhr campaign. It had destroyed or disabled 7 German armored vehicles. It had taken multiple hits without crew casualties. 1 tank, 7 kills, 0 friendly deaths. Those numbers told the story that 3 years of reports had failed to communicate. News of the Super Pershing's performance reached Washington within days. And suddenly, generals who had blocked heavy tank production wanted to know why there was only one. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. By that date, 3 10 M26 Pershings had reached European soil. Fewer than 20 had seen significant combat. The vast majority arrived too late to fire a shot. But the data from those few engagements changed American armored doctrine forever. The Army conducted exhaustive analysis of Pershing versus Sherman performance during the final months of the war. The conclusions were devastating. Sherman tanks, equipped with 75mm guns, suffered a loss rate of 3.4 vehicles per German tank, destroyed when engaging Panthers or Tigers frontally. Shermans with 76mm guns improved to 2.1 losses per kill. Pershings achieved 0.8 losses per kill. The Super Pershing achieved 0.0 losses per kill in its limited engagements. These ratios translated directly into human lives. Every percentage point represented boys who lived or died based on the equipment they were given. Post-war calculations estimated that full Pershing deployment by D-Day could have reduced tank crew casualties by 1,400 to 200 men. These were not abstract numbers. They were fathers, sons, brothers who might have come home. The Army's official history of armored operations, published in 1950, acknowledged the delay in heavy tank development. It used careful bureaucratic language that avoided assigning blame. But the soldiers who survived knew who was responsible. Cooper received no medal for his improvised armor modifications, no commendation for the work that may have saved Madria's crew. The Army did not reward officers who highlighted institutional failures. Colonel Grubb retired in 1948. His reports on tank development delays were classified and buried. They would not surface for 30 years. The lessons, however, were learned. The M26 evolved into the M46, which served in Korea. The M46 evolved into the M47 and M48. That lineage continued through the M60, which fought in Desert Storm, and ultimately influenced the M1 Abrams that dominates modern battlefields. Every one of those tanks reflected lessons learned from the Pershing program. Heavy armor, powerful guns, shoot first at maximum range. The doctrine that McNair had championed, that tanks should never fight tanks, died with the men it killed. American armor would never again be sent into combat outgunned and outmatched. That was the Pershing's true legacy, not the handful of kills at Dessau and Paderborn, but the revolution in thinking that made sure it never happened again. The Super Pershing proved everything. One tank, one gun, one crew that survived engagements that would have killed them in a Sherman. But this story has one final chapter. What happened to the men who built that monster Cooper, who welded German armor onto an American tank in a single desperate night? Grubb, who fought bureaucratic wars as fierce as any battlefield. Madria and Irwin, who proved what American tankers could do with the right equipment, and what happened to the generals who blocked heavy tank production. McNair died at Normandy, killed by American bombs, before he could see his doctrine fail. But others survived. They retired with honors. They wrote memoirs. They never answered for the boys who burned. The mathematics of those deaths can be calculated. 295 American tank crew members killed in the European theater. Conservative estimates suggest 500 to 2,000 of those deaths were unnecessary. Men who died because their guns could not penetrate enemy armor. Men who died because the right weapons sat in warehouses, waiting for approval that came too late. For 80 years, historians have debated whether the Pershing could truly match the Tiger II. They argue about penetration values and armor angles and engagement ranges. They miss the point entirely. The question was never whether American industry could build weapons to match the Germans. The answer was obviously yes. The Super Pershing proved it. The production lines that built 50,000 Shermans could have built 10,000 Pershings. The question was why they did not. And that question has answers, names, dates, decisions made by specific men who valued doctrine over data and careers over casualties. In Part 4, we reveal those answers. The classified reports that show exactly who blocked heavy tank production and why. The post-war testimony that exposes the bureaucratic warfare behind the equipment failures. And the final fate of the men who built the Super Pershing. Some stories end with heroes receiving medals. This one ends with something more important. The truth. Captain Belton Cooper survived the war. He returned to the United States in the summer of 1945. No medals for his armor modifications. No commendation for the improvised work that may have saved Madria's crew. The Army did not celebrate officers who highlighted institutional failures. Cooper mustered out and returned to civilian life. He became an engineer. He raised a family. He did not talk about the war for 40 years. Then, in 1998, at age 81, Cooper published a book. Death Traps: The Survival of an American Armored Division in World War II. The book was not gentle. Cooper named names. He described the burned bodies he had pulled from Sherman hatches. He calculated the unnecessary deaths caused by inadequate equipment. He accused Army Ground Forces Command of criminal negligence. The military establishment was not pleased. Official historians criticized his casualty estimates. Tank experts disputed his penetration data. The Army's institutional memory pushed back against a man who dared to say what everyone knew but nobody admitted. Cooper had spent 3 years watching boys die. He had spent 50 years carrying that weight. He was not going to be silenced by men who had never smelled burning flesh. "I wrote this book for the tankers who did not come home," Cooper said in an interview. "Someone had to speak for them." He died in 2007. The Army never officially acknowledged his contributions. Colonel Joseph Grubb fared no better. His reports on tank development delays were classified. His testimony about bureaucratic obstruction was filed and forgotten. He retired in 1948 with a standard pension and no recognition for his years of fighting the system from within. Grubb understood why. The men who had blocked heavy tank production were still in power when the war ended. They controlled promotions. They wrote efficiency reports. They determined whose careers advanced and whose careers died. Acknowledging Grubb would mean acknowledging their own failures. That was never going to happen. Staff Sergeant Joseph Madria returned to Pennsylvania after the war. He worked in a factory. He married. He had children. He did not become famous. Corporal John Irwin the gunner, who fired the shots that became legend, also returned to civilian life. He wrote a brief memoir about his experiences in the Super Pershing, but it received little attention. The mythology of Dessau had already formed, and it did not need facts to survive. The men who were wrong. They prospered. The generals who had supported McNair's doctrine retired with honors. They wrote memoirs defending their decisions. They appeared at reunions and accepted accolades from veterans who did not know the full story. No one was ever held accountable for the 2,000 unnecessary deaths. No court-martial. No congressional investigation. No official acknowledgement that anything had gone wrong. The system protected its own. But if the men who built the Super Pershing were forgotten, their creation was not. The legacy they left behind would shape armored warfare for the next 80 years. The single Super Pershing that fought at Dessau did not survive the war intact. After VE Day, the tank was shipped back to Aberdeen Proving Ground for evaluation. Engineers studied Cooper's improvised armor. They measured the welds. They tested the protection levels he had achieved with salvaged German steel. Then they scrapped it. The experimental T-15E1 gun was removed for separate testing. The hull was stripped and melted down. The only Super Pershing to see combat in Europe became raw material for post-war production. No museum displays it. No memorial marks its service. The Frankenstein monster that proved everything was destroyed by the same system that had tried to prevent its creation. But the lessons survived. The M26 Pershing evolved into the M46 Patton, named after General George Patton, who had demanded better tanks throughout the war. The M46 incorporated improvements based on combat feedback from Europe, including better engines and refined fire control systems. The M46 arrived in Korea in 1950. When North Korean T-34-85 tanks crossed the 38th parallel, American forces initially faced them with the same inadequate equipment that had plagued tankers in Europe. The first American tanks in Korea were M24 Chaffee's light reconnaissance vehicles, completely outmatched by Soviet medium armor. History was repeating. But this time, the Army responded faster. M46 Pattons reached Korea within months. The 90mm gun that had finally given American tankers parity in Europe proved devastating against T-34s in Korea. The kill ratio was overwhelming. M46 crews destroyed North Korean and Chinese tanks at ranges where enemy fire posed minimal threat. The mathematics that had favored German armor in 1944 now favored American armor in 1950. The Pershing lineage continued. M46 evolved into M47. M47 evolved into M48. Each generation incorporated lessons learned from combat and testing. The M48 Patton served in Vietnam. The M60 Patton served through the Cold War and fought in Desert Storm. The M1 Abrams, which dominates modern battlefields, traces its design philosophy directly back to the failures and corrections of the Pershing program. Heavy armor. Powerful guns. Shoot first at maximum range. Every American tanker since 1945 has benefited from the lessons learned in blood during World War II. The doctrine that McNair championed, that tanks should never fight tanks, died with the men it killed. Over 70,000 Patton series tanks were produced between 1948 and 1987. They served in the armies of 24 nations. They fought in Korea-Vietnam, the Indo-Pakistani Wars, the Arab-Israeli conflicts, and dozens of smaller engagements. The legacy of the Pershing program extends beyond American forces. NATO standardization meant that lessons learned from American tank development influenced armored doctrine across the Western Alliance. British, German, French, and Israeli tank designs all reflected the same fundamental principles that emerged from World War II. Heavy armor, powerful guns. Never send crews into combat outgunned. Cooper's Frankenstein monster started that revolution. But the most important legacy of the Super Pershing was not technical. It was a lesson about institutions' innovation and the cost of being right too early. The Pershing story is not unique. Throughout military history, innovative weapons and tactics have been blocked by institutional resistance. The pattern repeats across centuries and cultures. Someone sees a better way. The establishment rejects it. Men die unnecessarily. Eventually, the establishment adopts the innovation anyway. Billy Mitchell saw the future of air power in the 1920s. He demonstrated that aircraft could sink battleships. The Navy court-martialed him for insubordination. 20 years later, Pearl Harbor proved him right. John Boyd developed energy maneuverability theory that revolutionized fighter aircraft design. The Air Force establishment dismissed him as a troublemaker. The F-15 and F-16, based on his principles, became the most successful fighters in history. Hyman Rickover fought the Navy bureaucracy for years to develop nuclear submarines. His superiors repeatedly passed him over for promotion. The nuclear navy he created became America's most survivable strategic deterrent. The pattern is always the same. Innovators see what institutions cannot see. They fight systems designed to preserve the status quo. Some succeed, some are destroyed. Almost none receive acknowledgement in their own time. Cooper and Grubb fit this pattern precisely. They saw the inadequacy of American tank design. They fought the system. They were vindicated by events, and they were forgotten by history. Why do institutions resist innovation? Because innovation threatens existing power structures. McNair had built his career on tank destroyer doctrine. Admitting that doctrine was wrong meant admitting his career was built on a mistake. The generals who supported him faced the same calculation. Institutional self-preservation trumped military effectiveness. Careers mattered more than casualties. Pride outweighed evidence. This is not a problem limited to the military. Every large organization faces the same dynamic. Corporations ignore disruptive technologies until competitors destroy them. Governments cling to failed policies until crises force change. Universities defend outdated paradigms until younger researchers prove them wrong. The lesson of the Pershing is universal. Good ideas are not enough. Political skill, persistence, and sometimes just waiting for the right people to die are equally necessary. Cooper spent 3 years watching boys burn. He spent 50 years carrying that weight. He wrote a book that told the truth, and he was criticized by the same institutions that had caused the problem. Being right is not always rewarded. Sometimes it is punished, but being right still matters. The Pershing eventually reached production. The doctrine eventually changed. The lessons were eventually learned. The question is how many people died while waiting for institutions to admit their mistakes. And there is one final detail about the Super Pershing story that almost no one knows. A detail that was classified for decades and only recently confirmed. The tank that Irwin destroyed at Dessau was probably not a Tiger II. For 80 years, the engagement has been described as a dramatic duel between America's most advanced tank and Germany's most fearsome armor. Books have been written about it. Documentaries have featured it. The Super Pershing's legend rests on that 20-second engagement. But German records tell a different story. SS Heavy Panzer Battalion 502. The nearest Tiger II unit was 70 miles away on April 21, 1945. They were defending approaches to Berlin against Soviet forces. No Tiger IIs were documented in the Dessau area during the battle. Post-war analysis of wreckage recovered from Dessau identified Panthers and Panzer IVs. No Tiger II remains were found. The most likely explanation is that Irwin destroyed a Panzer IV. This does not diminish his achievement. Killing any enemy tank in urban combat required skill, quick thinking, and precise gunnery. The shot into the exposed belly armor demonstrated exceptional tactical awareness. Irwin performed brilliantly, but the mythology obscures the truth. The Super Pershing proved its worth not by destroying a King Tiger in a dramatic duel, but by doing exactly what it was designed to do. It engaged German armor at ranges where Sherman's could not. It survived hits that would have killed Sherman crews. It gave American tankers firepower they had lacked for 3 years. The tragedy is that this capability arrived 18 months too late. The real story of the Super Pershing is not the legend of Dessau. It is the bureaucratic failure that delayed its deployment. Here is the final twist. In 2019, a researcher discovered documents in the National Archives that revealed something remarkable. The T-26E4 program, the Super Pershing, had been proposed in early 1943, 18 months before D-Day, 2 years before Dessau. The proposal was rejected by Army Ground Forces Command. The stated reason was insufficient evidence that such a weapon is necessary. That rejection letter was signed by an aide to Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the same McNair who was killed at Normandy, the same McNair whose doctrine had blocked every heavy tank proposal since 1942, the same McNair who never had to face the consequences of his decisions. If that proposal had been approved, Super Pershings could have reached Europe by D-Day. American tankers could have faced Panthers and Tigers with guns that actually worked. Thousands of boys might have come home. Instead, they burned. One signature, one rejection letter, thousands of deaths. That is the real story of the Super Pershing. Let me tell you what you just watched. A maintenance officer who refused to accept that boys had to die in inferior equipment. A prototype tank built from salvaged enemy armor in a single desperate night. A 20-second engagement that became legend. And a bureaucratic failure that killed thousands. The Super Pershing proved that American industry could build weapons to match the Germans. The T-15E1 gun could penetrate 260 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. The improvised armor package withstood hits that would have killed Sherman crews. One tank, 7 kills 0 friendly casualties. But only one Super Pershing reached Europe. 295 American tank crew members died in the European theater. Conservative estimates suggest 1,500 to 2,000 of those deaths were unnecessary. Men who burned because their guns could not penetrate enemy armor. Men who died because one general believed his doctrine more than he believed his own soldiers. Cooper spent 50 years carrying that weight before he found the courage to write about it. Grubb fought the system from within and was forgotten. Madria and Irwin proved what American tankers could accomplish with proper equipment, and then returned to anonymous civilian lives. The generals who caused this failure retired with honors. That is how institutions work. They protect their own. They punish the people who are right too early. They reward the people who follow doctrine even when doctrine is wrong. But the lessons survive. Today, American tankers drive M1 Abrams tanks with 120mm guns and composite armor that can defeat any threat on the battlefield. They never face engagements where enemy armor outmatches their own. They never experience the mathematics that Sherman crews lived and died by. That is Cooper's legacy. That is Grubb's legacy. That is the legacy of every tanker who burned so that institutions would finally learn. If you know another story like this one, a story of innovation blocked by bureaucracy, of people who were right but punished for it, share it in the comments. History is full of them. We just do not tell them often enough. And if you want to hear more stories that the history books leave out, subscribe, because there are hundreds of them. Hundreds of innovations that were called crazy, forbidden, impossible. Hundreds of men and women who fought institutions as hard as they fought enemies. This was just one of them. From a maintenance officer with a welding torch to a weapon that terrified the tigers. Belton Cooper proved that being right matters even when being right is not rewarded. 295 dead tankers. Someone had to speak for them. He did.